It started with a voicemail I never meant to hear. I was scrolling through old files on my phone, doing one of those digital cleanses we all pretend will simplify our lives. Recipes I'd never made, blurry photos of sunsets that looked more like spilled ink, delete, delete, delete. And then, hidden deep in the saved messages folder, was one from April 9th, 2013. 10 years ago. It shouldn't have been there. My thumb hovered over the trash icon, but something made me pause. I hit play. The voice crackled through with hesitation, low and familiar. It took me a moment, but I knew who it was. Nate. The drop in my stomach was instant. Nate wasn't just a name. He was the name. The person who knew how I took my coffee, who used to send me songs that reminded me of you, but in a good way, who once sat outside my house in the rain just to say sorry for what, I can't even remember now. We'd lost touch, as people do, one missed text at a time. But this voicemail pulled me back in. Hey, it's me. I know we haven't talked in a while, but something happened today, and I just thought of you. I don't even know why I'm calling. I guess I just wanted to hear your voice. Anyway, it's probably stupid. Hope you're good. And that was it. No second message, no follow-up. Just Nate's voice suspended in time, like a thread tugging at the edge of everything I thought I'd left behind. I stared at the screen like it owed me answers. What happened on April 9th, 2013? Why me? Why that day? And why had I never heard this until now? But I didn't know yet that voicemail wasn't just a message. It was a key. A key to something I didn't know was locked. A memory. A death. And a secret that was never meant for me. I couldn't let it go. That voicemail looped in my head like a song with only one verse. I listened to it on the train, brushing my teeth. Even while pretending to care about work meetings I barely showed up for mentally. That one sentence clung to me, something happened today. I told myself it was nothing. People say vague things all the time. Maybe he saw someone who looked like me. Maybe a song came on. But Nate wasn't vague. Nate was precise, thoughtful. If he called me after months of silence, it meant something. So I did what I probably shouldn't have. I looked up the date. April 9th, 2013. A Tuesday. I had just started a new job, moved into a shoebox apartment with yellowing blinds and no air conditioning. Nothing notable. But the internet had something else to say. A headline blinked at me from a forgotten corner of local news. Man found dead in Riverside Park, believed missing for 3 days. I nearly closed the tab. Until I saw the name. Jeremy Miles. I didn't know Jeremy well. But Nate did. Really well. They were the kind of friends who stood too close, talked too quietly, always looked like they knew something the rest of us didn't. I remember once asking Nate, "Are you and Jeremy?" And he laughed before I could finish. Not a yes. Not a no. Just that laugh that dodged the answer without killing the question. Jeremy had disappeared on April 6th. His body was found April 9th, same day as the voicemail. That wasn't coincidence. That was grief. And maybe guilt. The more I thought about it, the more I knew. Nate hadn't just called me for comfort. He called because something was haunting him, and he needed someone who remembered him before it started. That person, somehow, was me. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, trying to feel something that had happened a decade ago, wondering if Nate had been trying to confess or warn me. 2 days later, I stood in front of my childhood home, clutching a duffel bag and a half-formed excuse about taking a break. My mom didn't ask questions. She just hugged me the way moms do when they know something's off and said, "You look tired." I walked the old streets that night, tracing familiar routes like they might draw out forgotten answers. Trees were taller, houses smaller. Nate's old place still stood, white paint peeling, porch light flickering like it couldn't decide whether to burn out or hold on. I didn't knock. I just stood across the street, wondering who lived there now, and if they knew the silence that had lived in that house once. Instead, I kept walking. The high school was closed, obviously, but I looped behind the gym where we used to hang out. That's where it all started. Nate skipping detention, me waiting for my ride in the rain. We talked. That became a thing. Then Jeremy joined. Jeremy was the kind of person people lean toward without realizing it. He didn't try to be magnetic, it just happened. He and Nate had that charged stillness between them, like they were holding a secret neither wanted to say out loud. I never asked. I think I was afraid of the answer. I pulled out my phone and stared at the voicemail again. Not playing it. Just looking. April 9th. I typed Nate's number into an old contact search. It was still active. Still linked to an address. Not his parents' place, an apartment downtown. I stared at it, heart thumping like a warning. Then I went. It was a small brick building squished between a bookstore and a shuttered laundromat. I buzzed. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. I was turning to leave when someone came out and held the door open behind them without looking. I slipped in, pulse loud in my ears. I told myself I'd just knock, see if he answered. But the door to Unit 3B was slightly ajar. I froze. Pushed gently. It creaked open. The apartment was still, not empty, just paused. A coffee mug on the table, dead plant in the window, and next to them, one neatly folded letter, addressed to whoever comes looking. I stared at that letter for a full minute before I even moved. It sat there like it had been waiting, not for anyone, but for me. The envelope wasn't sealed. Inside, a few pages of thick paper slightly smudged at the edges, like it had been read, maybe even cried over. Nate's handwriting was unmistakable. Slanted, tidy, with capital letters that leaned a little to the right. The first line knocked the breath out of me. If you're reading this, I didn't have the guts to say it out loud. I sat down on the worn couch, heart in my throat. He went on. There are moments where silence feels safer than the truth. I've lived too many of those. This is the last one I want to keep. He wrote about Jeremy. Jeremy didn't die. He chose it. I blinked hard, rereading that line. And I didn't stop him. Not when he asked to talk. Not when he showed me the signs. I told myself I wasn't strong enough to hold someone else's storm. But I was just afraid. He said Jeremy had confessed something the week before he died. That he was in love with someone who never knew. That person wasn't me. But I knew who it was. And I never told them. I never gave him the chance to say it out loud, to be known, to be seen. I watched him sink in silence. And I let him. My hands were shaking. Nate's words weren't just confession. They were a hand reaching backward through time, trying to undo something that couldn't be undone. The only person I wanted to talk to that night was you, he wrote. You always listened, even when I couldn't speak. Maybe that's why I called. And maybe that's why you're here now. I didn't cry. I don't know why. Maybe because I was too stunned. Or maybe because part of me had always known there was more to that voicemail than just grief. The letter ended with one question scribbled in a slightly darker ink. What if it's not too late to tell them? And I knew, even without him saying it, Nate hadn't just left behind a letter. He left behind a task. Find out who Jeremy loved. And maybe, if I had the courage he didn't, tell them. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room at my mom's house, staring at the ceiling stars I stuck there in middle school, replaying every detail I could remember about Jeremy. Every party, every glance, every sidelong conversation I witnessed, but never fully understood. The next morning, I sat in the corner booth of the only diner still open late in town with a napkin and a ballpoint pen, scribbling names like I was plotting a murder mystery. Only this one had already happened. There was Sati Bloom. Jeremy dated her for a while, but everyone knew it wasn't serious. She liked attention more than connection. Then Ben Tran, his debate partner. Always intense, always watching. Holly Reeves, a hugger with a sixth sense for heartbreak. And then, circled 3 times in red ink, Aiden Bell. I hadn't thought about Aiden in years, but now his name pulsed on the napkin like it wanted out. He and Jeremy had always had a strange closeness. Not loud, not showy. More like magnetic. The last time I saw them together was senior year, at a bonfire. Jeremy had been laughing, genuinely, the kind that made people lean in. Aiden showed up late, sat next to him, and minutes later, they left. Quietly. No goodbyes. No fanfare. Just gone. Back then, I thought nothing of it. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I did what anyone would do. I looked him up. Aiden still lived nearby. 2 towns over. High school English teacher. His Facebook was full of blurry selfies, dog pics, and quotes about books and heartbreak. But one post stopped me cold. A quote. Some silences are louder than words. Some memories louder than silence. No author. Just those words. But I'd seen them before. Nate had written them in his journal during senior year. He once slipped me a sticky note with that exact phrase after I'd failed a test and wouldn't talk about it. That quote wasn't random. It was a breadcrumb. And suddenly, I wasn't chasing a name anymore. I was chasing the echo of something unspoken between 2 boys who never got to say what mattered. I sent Aiden a message. Casual, like we hadn't spoken in over a decade and I just happened to be in town. Hey, wild thought, want to grab coffee sometime? Would love to catch up. I didn't expect a response. But he replied in under an hour. Sure. This week. We picked a cafe halfway between our towns. I wore neutral clothes, like I was trying to disappear into the furniture. He looked exactly the same, older, maybe, but in the way that makes you think of photographs aged on purpose. When he smiled, it was familiar. When he looked away, it was loaded. We made small talk for 15 minutes. Jobs, weather, town gossip. But then I said it. Do you ever think about Jeremy? The smile faded. Sometimes, he said quietly. I still have questions. Like? I asked, but I already knew. He stared into his coffee. Like if I should have said something sooner. If it would have made a difference. I waited. He didn't continue. So I did. I told him about the voicemail, about Nate's letter. I didn't show it, just gave him the gist. I watched his expression freeze, like someone had turned down the volume in his brain. When I finished, he whispered he knew. He did. And he didn't tell me? His voice cracked at the edge. And there it was. The confirmation I hadn't been ready for. It was you, wasn't it? I asked gently. The person Jeremy loved. He didn't speak. Just nodded once. Small, broken. I never got the chance to tell him, he said. I thought we had more time. He told me he had something to say. The day before he went missing. But I chickened out. Told him I couldn't talk. His eyes glistened. I thought I'd get another day. You always think you'll get another day. I reached across the table and set my hand next to his. Not touching. Just near. You can still say it, I said. Even if it's too late for him, maybe it's not too late for you. And Aiden whispered, I loved him too. I just didn't know how to hold it. And for the first time, I saw not just grief, but release. We sat there in silence, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled, just shared. When he finally looked up, Aiden said, I thought no one knew. I carried it like a bruise under my ribs. I didn't tell him that Nate had carried it too, or that the weight of that silence had bent them both in different ways. Some truths don't need retelling. They just need air. We finished our coffee and parted with an awkward hug, half memory, half apology. That night, I walked the path behind the high school again. The wind had picked up, and the old gym wall creaked like it remembered us. I sat down on the same bench we used to haunt, stared at the stars barely visible above the floodlights, and played Nate's voicemail one last time. Something happened today. I finally understood what. Nate hadn't called to explain. He called because he needed someone to carry what he couldn't, to hold a story he didn't trust himself to finish. I pulled out the letter, the one I'd read so many times the creases had become scars in the paper. The part that stuck with me wasn't his guilt. It was the question, what if it's not too late to tell them? I thought about Aiden's face when I told him. The way his shoulders collapsed and his eyes found something they'd been missing. Maybe that was the point. Not to fix anything. Just to unbury it. The truth didn't save Jeremy. But it freed Aiden. And maybe, in a strange way, it freed Nate too. I wrote a short note on a scrap of paper. Just a sentence. He loved you. He just didn't know how to say it. I slipped it into an envelope and mailed it to Aiden the next morning. No return address. Just that. Nothing else needed. I wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying someone else's story. I was part of it. And it was still unfolding. Weeks passed. The letter I mailed felt like a stone dropped into a still pond, one I wasn't sure would ripple. I didn't hear from Aiden. I didn't expect to. Some messages are meant to settle quietly in someone's chest, not echo back. Life, in its patient way, began to reassemble. I returned to my apartment, went back to work, rejoined the orbit of normalcy. But something had changed. I noticed things more. The way a stranger held the door an extra second, or how people say, I'm fine, with different tones, each hiding a truth. One Friday, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. No name. Just my address and one word on the flap. Thanks. Inside was a Polaroid. A photo I hadn't seen before. It was old, grainy, us behind the gym. Me, Nate, Jeremy, and Aiden. I didn't even remember the moment. We looked unbothered, like we had all the time in the world. Scribbled in pen on the back, there was love. There was always love. I held that photo for a long time, standing in my kitchen as the kettle screamed in the background. That same evening, I went through the last folder I had from high school. In a manila envelope tucked behind old birthday cards and concert tickets, I found a drawing. Jeremy's. A quick sketch he'd done of our group, everyone laughing. He doodled it during history class and handed it to me like it was nothing. Doesn't look like us, I'd said. It looks better, he replied. I'd forgotten that moment completely until now. I flipped it over. On the back, in the same loose cursive, we were more than we knew. That's when the twist hit me, not in what I'd discovered, but in what I'd overlooked. It wasn't just Jeremy who had carried love quietly. It wasn't just Nate who had been brave too late. I had been there. I had seen it all. Felt the air shift between people. Laughed a second too loud to cover the weight in the room. And said nothing. Sometimes we're not the main character in a story, but that doesn't mean we're not part of the ending. A month later, I found myself back at the park near our high school, the one where we used to meet on summer nights, half for the view and half because none of us had basements big enough to sit around in. I brought the sketch with me, folded in quarters and soft at the edges, like time had thinned it. I sat on the same bench Jeremy used to lean against, watching the sunset wash the town in orange and gold. It felt right to bring it there, like some stories need to be closed in the same places they were born. I hadn't planned to run into anyone. But as fate would have it, Aiden showed up. Not by coincidence, I realized, but because he, too, had returned to the scene of the memory. He didn't look surprised to see me, just tired. He sat down next to me like we'd done it 1,000 times, even though we hadn't in over a decade. I got your note, he said. I figured. He reached into his coat and pulled something out. A bracelet, worn leather with a small metal charm. Jeremy gave this to me the night before he disappeared, he said quietly. Told me it didn't mean anything, but it did. He turned it over to show me the inscription. Say it while you can. I never did, Aiden whispered. Until now. We sat there a long time. The kind of quiet where even breathing feels like punctuation. Do you think it would have made a difference? He asked finally. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, maybe not for Jeremy, but it made a difference for you. He nodded, slowly. And maybe that's enough. I handed him the drawing. He kept this, I said. Gave it to me like it wasn't a big deal. But it is. Aiden smiled. He always saw more than we gave him credit for. We watched the sun dip below the trees. And for the first time in years, I felt something settle. Not peace, exactly, but the kind of closure you get from finally saying the things that lived too long in silence. Not everything needed to be healed. Some things just needed to be heard. After that evening, we didn't keep in constant contact, but something subtle shifted. Aiden sent me an old photo once a week, each one with a timestamp, each one a piece of a past we were both still decoding. Sometimes it was all he sent. Other times, a line. Did we ever talk about this night? Or, I never noticed the way Jeremy looked at him here. It became a ritual. Small, quiet, safe. And then came a photo I hadn't expected. It was from our senior year's spring play. None of us were in the cast, but we'd all gone to support a friend. Jeremy was in the audience, sitting 2 seats away from me. Nate was next to him, and Aiden sat at the far end of the row. What froze me wasn't the seating. It was the expression. Jeremy, mid-laugh. Nate, looking at Jeremy, not just a glance, but really looking. And Aiden, staring at his own hands, fingers tightly interlaced. There was something layered in that row. Something unspoken, tightly knotted. I zoomed in on Nate's face. There was a softness there. Recognition. I pulled out the letter again, the one he left behind, and read the part that always snagged my breath. That person wasn't me, but I knew who it was. But what if Nate had been wrong? Or afraid? Or protecting something that never needed to be hidden? I went back through old texts, old photos, and one stuck out. Taken at Jeremy's 18th birthday. Everyone had signed a giant card. Jeremy held it up for the camera, and at the bottom, in Nate's slanted handwriting, was a quote. You know, if I could say it, I would. I'd always thought it was a joke. Now, I wasn't so sure. What if Jeremy never told Aiden how he felt? What if Nate assumed he had? What if all 3 of them, Nate, Jeremy, Aiden, had stood in a triangle of silence, each waiting for the other to speak first? Maybe none of them were the person Jeremy had loved. Or maybe all of them were, in different ways. Love is rarely simple, and memory almost never tells the whole truth. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, like I'd walked through a maze and exited too early, skipping the last corner. So I did something I hadn't done since the voicemail. I went back to the source. Nate's apartment. I hadn't touched the voicemail since that first week, but I still had the letter, and something about it felt unfinished. I read it again, slowly, like a detective parsing a goodbye. The last page had always ended with "what if it's not too late to tell them?" But now I noticed something new. Just beneath it, faintly indented, almost like a pressure mark, was a word. A name, maybe. The imprint of something written and then erased. I tilted the page under my desk lamp. Jules. It wasn't Aiden. That much was clear. So who was Jules? I tore through yearbooks, social media, everything. Jeremy had a cousin named Julian, but he moved away before high school. Then it hit me. There was a girl, soft-spoken, sat 2 rows behind us in chemistry. Jules, Harper. Always sketching in the margins of her notebook. Quiet, but kind. Jeremy once helped her build a set for the school play. I remembered her now, not clearly, but enough to feel a twinge of guilt for forgetting. She left school halfway through senior year. Rumor was her dad got a job out of state. But I found her. Instagram wasn't helpful, private account, 0 posts. But LinkedIn gave me an email. I stared at the screen. What was I going to say? Hey, remember Jeremy Miles? He might have loved you, and now I'm trying to make sure someone knows that. I sent a message anyway. Short. Simple. Hi, Jules. This is going to sound strange, but I think you were important to someone who's no longer here. If you're open to talking, I'd love to share something with you. I didn't expect a reply, but 2 days later, I got one. I always wondered if he meant to tell me. Maybe now's the time I finally hear it. And just like that, A decade-old silence prepared to crack open one more time. We met at a bookstore cafe halfway between our cities. Jules walked in wearing a green coat and a hesitant smile, like someone stepping into a memory they weren't sure was theirs anymore. She recognized me instantly. "You sat next to me during the frog dissection," she said. I laughed. "You made yours wear googly eyes." I named it Sir Croaksalot. We talked for an hour about nothing, just easing into the past like slipping into a warm pool. Then I gave her the letter. Nate's letter. I told her who I was, why I had it, and what I'd been trying to understand. I expected confusion, maybe doubt. But she read it quietly, expression unreadable. When she looked up, her eyes were glassy. "I thought it was me," she whispered. "Back then. I thought maybe. But I was too scared to ask." She pulled something from her bag, an old photo. Jeremy and her, sitting on the school lawn. He was holding a sketchbook. "He gave this to me the day before he disappeared," she said. "Said it was just for now." I never understood what that meant. I turned the photo over. A message written in pen. "If I'm quiet, it's because I don't want to say the wrong thing. But it doesn't mean I don't feel it." My throat tightened. That could have been written to anyone: Aiden, Nate, Jules. Or maybe it was for all of them. Maybe Jeremy had left parts of his heart with everyone, hoping someone would know how to carry it. Maybe that's what happens with some people. They don't love in straight lines. They love in echoes. Jules folded the letter gently. "I'm glad someone still remembers," she said. "That he mattered to more than just me." "He did," I said. "Still does." We hugged like people who'd both lost something unnamed. As I drove home, I realized the twist wasn't that I found out who Jeremy loved. It was that he was loved, by many, in ways he never got to hear. And maybe we all walked away carrying pieces of a boy who had tried so hard to speak through silence. The voicemail is still saved. I don't play it anymore. I don't need to. I hear it sometimes in other voices, in the pauses people leave when they're afraid to speak the truth. And now, when they pause, I wait. I listen. Because someone once trusted me to hold a story they couldn't finish. And maybe, in telling it, I gave it the ending it deserved.